It's been obviously fantastic, and she's been a little joy of heaven. But at the same time, it's a more responsibility looking after two little ones, especially when George is around. He's a little monkey. But no, it's fantastic having a lovely little family, and I'm so thrilled. And Catherine has been doing an amazing job as a mother, and I'm very proud of her.
They told her she was too young. They told her to wait her turn. She ignored every single one of them. What happened next left an entire nation completely lost for words. A 9-year-old princess walked up to a podium, opened her mouth, and said something so powerful, so unexpected, that grown adults broke down in tears and the whole room exploded onto their feet. Nobody predicted this. Nobody was prepared for this. And once you hear what she said, you will understand exactly why Princess Charlotte just changed the monarchy forever. You need to see this.
A lot. I think people assume that because I'm a parent, that's why I've taken an interest in the early years. I think this really is bigger than that. This isn't just about happy, healthy children. This is about the society I hope we could and can become, right from the early days, meeting.
What does it take for a young member of the royal family to leave a lasting impression on an entire nation? That is a question worth sitting with, because the answer is not always what you might expect. It does not always come from decades of experience, a long record of public service, or years spent in the spotlight. Sometimes it comes from someone who has barely had the chance to grow up. Princess Charlotte, the second child of the fisherman, Prince and Princess of Wales, has already shown the world that potential does not wait for age. But to understand who she is becoming, you have to go back to where her story begins. On the 2nd of May 2015, a large crowd gathered outside the Lindo wing of St Mary's Hospital in London. The wait had been building for days, and when the announcement finally came, it spread quickly. Catherine, then the Duchess of Cambridge, had given birth to a daughter. The baby was named Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana of Cambridge, and within hours, the news had circled the globe. The excitement that followed was about more than just a new royal baby. It carried a particular significance that set this birth apart from many that had come before it. For the first time in British history, a princess would not lose her place in the line of succession simply because a younger brother came along. A change in the law, which came into effect through the Succession to the Crown Act of 2013, meant that gender would no longer determine a royal child's ranking. Charlotte was third in line to the throne at birth, behind her father and her brother Prince George, and she would stay there regardless of what came next. It was a quiet but meaningful shift, and Charlotte was the first royal to benefit from it before she had even opened her eyes. The early photographs of Charlotte were taken by her mother, and they showed a calm, wide-eyed baby wrapped in soft clothing. Those images were shared across newspapers and websites around the world, and the public reaction was immediate. People were drawn to her from the start. Before long, retailers and clothing brands began noticing something unusual. Whenever Charlotte appeared in public wearing a particular outfit, sales of similar items would spike sharply. This pattern was picked up by journalists and industry analysts, who started referring to it as the Princess Charlotte effect. It was a term that stuck, and it illustrated just how much attention was being paid to her even before she could walk or talk. Her first birthday came and went with official portraits that showed a child full of energy and curiosity. By the time she was toddling around and making brief public appearances, she had already developed a way of engaging with cameras and crowds that felt natural rather than rehearsed. A small wave, a wide smile, a moment of eye contact with a stranger in the crowd. These were simple gestures, but they resonated with people. There was something about Charlotte that felt both regal and entirely approachable, a combination that is harder to manufacture than it might seem. Behind the scenes, however, William and Catherine were thinking carefully about how to raise their children in a way that went beyond appearances. The public saw the smiles and the outfits, but the private focus was on building a foundation of values. Discipline, empathy, and an understanding of the responsibilities that came with their position were all part of the picture. The couple had spoken openly on various occasions about their desire to give their children as normal an upbringing as possible, while still preparing them for the realities of royal life. It was a balance that would require constant adjustment as the children grew older. One of the more unexpected details to emerge from Charlotte's early years was her exposure to a second language. Reports from royal correspondents and those close to the family indicated that Charlotte was learning Spanish through her nanny, Maria Teresa Turion Borrallo. a trained professional who had been with the family since shortly after George was born. By the time Charlotte was around 2 years old, she was said to be conversational in both English and Spanish. For many people, this came as a genuine surprise. It was not the sort of detail that gets built into a royal image for the sake of it. It reflected a deliberate decision by her parents to give her tools that could serve her well in an increasingly connected world. Language, after all, is one of the most direct ways of reaching people, and learning Spanish at such a young age gave Charlotte access to hundreds of millions of potential conversations she might never have had otherwise. Her first major official engagement came in June 2016 when she appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace during Trooping the Colour, the annual ceremony held to mark the sovereign's official birthday. Charlotte was just over a year old, and she was held in her mother's arms for much of the appearance. But she was alert, looking out at the crowds and the aircraft flying overhead, and the photographs from that day were widely circulated. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of a pattern of public appearances that would grow steadily more complex as she got older. By the time Charlotte was 3, she was accompanying her parents on official overseas visits. A trip to Germany and Poland in the summer of 2017 gave the public a clearer sense of her personality in a less controlled setting. Footage and photographs from the trip showed her interacting with local children, meeting dignitaries, and navigating the social demands of a visit abroad with a composure that surprised many observers. She curtsied when appropriate, shook hands, and appeared comfortable in situations that most children her age would have found overwhelming. Those close to the family were not surprised. The groundwork had been laid carefully and consistently, and it was beginning to show. These years, from her birth through her early childhood, were not marked by any single dramatic moment. There was no grand speech or defining event that suddenly put Charlotte on the map. Instead, what took shape during this period was something quieter and arguably more durable. A character was being formed, a set of values was being absorbed. A young girl was learning through daily life and careful guidance what it meant to exist in the public eye, without losing herself in it. The years ahead would bring new opportunities and new challenges, but the foundation was already in place. The years that followed Charlotte's early childhood brought with them a gradual but noticeable shift. She was no longer simply a baby being carried onto balconies or a toddler waving at crowds from a safe distance. She was growing into a child with a distinct personality, observable interests, and an expanding role within the royal family. The public watched with curiosity, and what they saw over the course of these years was a picture that grew steadily more detailed and more compelling. In September 2018, Charlotte started at Thomas's Battersea, the same school her brother George had been attending for a year. The choice of school was itself a statement of sorts. Rather than opting for private home tutoring, which had been the tradition for many generations of royal children, William and Catherine chose to place their children in a conventional school environment. Thomas's Battersea is a private school, but it operates within a social setting that exposes children to friendships, group learning, and the ordinary rhythms of school life in a way that a home education simply cannot replicate. The decision was consistent with what the couple had said publicly about wanting their children to experience as much of normal life as their circumstances allowed. At school, Charlotte was by all accounts an enthusiastic and engaged student. Those familiar with her time there described a child who threw herself into lessons with genuine energy. She had a particular fondness for art, drama, and sport, interests that gave some indication of her broader personality. She was not a child who sat quietly at the edges of things. She participated, she contributed, and she made an impression on the people around her. The infectious enthusiasm that observers had noted during her public appearances was, it seemed, equally present in the classroom. Away from school, the activities that Charlotte was involved in outside of formal education were also telling. She and her siblings participated in a number of family-led initiatives that went beyond the ceremonial aspects of royal life. One of the more publicly visible of these was the Wales family's involvement in a garden created for the Chelsea Flower Show. Charlotte, alongside her parents and siblings, helped plant and tend the garden, which was designed around the theme of outdoor play and the benefits of nature for children's well-being. The photographs from that project showed a child happily engaged with soil and plants, entirely unconcerned with the cameras nearby. It was the kind of image that felt authentic rather than staged, and it resonated with people precisely because of that. Catherine's own deep interest in the natural world and the outdoors had clearly been passed on to her children. Charlotte in particular seemed to share her mother's appreciation for being outside and engaging with the environment in a hands-on way. This was not just a matter of personal preference. William and Catherine were deliberately using activities like this to shape the way their children understood their place in the world. An appreciation for nature, a willingness to get involved in practical tasks, and an awareness of the environment as something worth protecting were all values being quietly embedded through these experiences. The family's move from Kensington Palace to Adelaide Cottage in Windsor, which took place in the summer of 2022, marked another shift in Charlotte's day-to-day life. The move brought the family to a quieter, more private setting, away from the intensity of central London. It also brought Charlotte physically closer to her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, who was based at Windsor Castle. The relationship between Charlotte and the late Queen had always been visible in public appearances, with the two often photographed sharing small, warm exchanges during royal gatherings. But the proximity that came with the Windsor move allowed for a more regular and personal connection between them during the final months of the Queen's life. Queen Elizabeth II had been a consistent presence throughout Charlotte's childhood, and the influence she had on the younger members of the royal family was well documented. For Charlotte, spending time near her great-grandmother during this period was understood by those close to the family to have been genuinely formative. The Queen embodied a particular approach to public life that was defined by consistency, restraint, and an unshakable sense of duty. These were not abstract qualities to Charlotte. They were visible in how her great-grandmother carried herself, how she spoke to people, and how she approached the responsibilities of her role day after day, decade after decade. That kind of example, experienced at close range during childhood, tends to leave a mark. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away in September 2022, the loss was felt across the country and around the world. For Charlotte, it was also a deeply personal bereavement. She had lost not just a figurehead, but someone she had known as a great-grandmother. The days that followed the Queen's death were among the most publicly scrutinised in recent royal history, and Charlotte was present throughout. She attended the funeral alongside her family, dressed in mourning clothes, and conducted herself throughout the proceedings with a composure that drew widespread comment. Observers noted the way Charlotte carried herself during those days. She was 7 years old at the time of the Queen's death, and the weight of the occasion was visible on her face. But she did not falter. She stood straight, she remained attentive, and she moved through the ceremonies with a quiet dignity that seemed beyond her years. Many people who watched the coverage remarked on the similarity between Charlotte's bearing and that of her great-grandmother in comparable moments of national gravity. It was a comparison that felt earned rather than flattering, and it said something meaningful about what Charlotte had absorbed during her years of watching and learning. Beyond the formal occasions and public engagements, Charlotte's development during this period was also being shaped by the values her parents continued to prioritize in her upbringing. Charitable activity was a consistent thread running through her childhood. She joined her siblings on visits to organisations supported by the royal family, including a visit to a baby bank charity in Maidenhead, where she and her siblings helped sort through donated items for families in need. During that visit, Charlotte's natural curiosity and warmth were on clear display. She engaged with the task carefully and thoughtfully, and in one moment that was noted by those present, she held up a small item of clothing and connected it to a personal memory in a way that showed she was not simply going through the motions. She was genuinely present. These experiences were doing something important. They were giving Charlotte a direct, tangible understanding of what service actually looked like beyond the theory of it. She was not just being told that supporting others mattered. She was being placed in situations where she could see and feel the difference that practical action made in people's lives. That kind of education does not come from textbooks or formal instruction. It comes from being there, paying attention, and caring enough to engage. By the time this period of Charlotte's life drew to a close, a clear picture had emerged. She was a child of considerable character, shaped by a combination of careful parenting, meaningful experiences, and the example of people around her who took the responsibilities of their positions seriously. She had shown emotional maturity in some of the most demanding public circumstances imaginable. She had demonstrated genuine enthusiasm for learning, for nature, for connecting with people, and for the causes her family championed. and she had quietly absorbed lessons from her great-grandmother that would, in time, become visible in the way she carried herself in the world. The next stage of her story would bring with it a far more prominent platform, and everything that had come before had been, in its own way, preparation for it. There are moments in public life that arrive quietly, with little warning of the impact they are about to make. The weeks leading up to Princess Charlotte's first major public address in 2023 did not generate the kind of overwhelming media attention that might have been expected. There was speculation, of course. There always is when a member of the royal family is involved. But the scale of what was about to happen was not something that many people had fully anticipated. Charlotte was 8 years old, soon to turn 9, and while she had accumulated years of experience in public settings, nothing she had done before had placed her at a podium in front of a large audience with a microphone and a prepared speech. The event itself was tied to a platform designed to highlight issues of social significance, bringing together a gathering of people from a range of backgrounds with an interest in the kinds of causes the royal family had long associated itself with. When the decision was made to include Charlotte as a speaker, it was not widely expected. Her brother Prince George, as the elder of the two and the future king, was the name most people assumed would step forward for this kind of prominent role. The choice of Charlotte instead signaled something deliberate. It suggested that those close to the family and the family itself saw in her a particular readiness and a particular kind of presence that suited the occasion. The preparation that went into the speech was serious and sustained. Charlotte did not simply receive a script and rehearse it until the words came out smoothly. The process, as described by those familiar with how the Wales household approaches these things, was collaborative and thoughtful. Catherine played a central role throughout. Having navigated her own considerable journey into public life, she was well placed to help Charlotte understand not just what to say, but why it mattered. The two of them worked through the speech together, discussing the ideas behind it, refining the language until it felt natural, and ensuring that the message Charlotte would deliver was genuinely her own, rather than something handed down to her from an adult perspective. William was equally involved in building Charlotte's confidence during this period. His approach tended to be practical and grounding. He had spoken in public himself on numerous occasions about subjects close to his heart, and he understood the particular pressure that comes with standing in front of an audience and speaking about something you care about. The support he offered Charlotte in the weeks before the event was quiet but consistent, focused on helping her feel prepared without making the occasion feel more daunting than it needed to be. Between the two of them, her parents created an environment in which Charlotte could approach the speech not as an ordeal to get through, but as an opportunity to say something meaningful. The venue selected for the event was a historic location in London, one that carried the weight of previous significant occasions and lent the gathering a sense of gravity appropriate to the subject matter being discussed. As the date drew nearer, the level of public interest began to build. Journalists and commentators started to pick up on the fact that Charlotte would be speaking, and the anticipation grew steadily. For many people, the idea of a child of her age standing up and addressing a room full of adults at an event of this kind was remarkable in itself. The question on many minds was not so much what she would say as how she would carry herself under that kind of pressure. On the day, Charlotte arrived composed. The photographs and footage from outside the venue showed her stepping out with the kind of measured calm that had become familiar to anyone who had followed her public appearances over the years. She was dressed simply but carefully, in an outfit chosen with the occasion in mind, and she walked into the building with her posture upright and her expression focused. Her siblings George and Louis were present in the audience, along with William and Catherine, and there was something quietly significant about the arrangement. Charlotte was not being shielded or supported at the front of the room. She was the one taking the step forward, and her family was there to witness it. When she reached the podium, the room settled into silence. That moment, just before the first word, carries a particular kind of tension in any public speaking situation. For someone of Charlotte's age, standing in front of an audience of that size, with the awareness that the event was being covered and that people far beyond the room were watching, the weight of that silence must have been considerable, but she did not let it show. She found her footing quickly, looked out at the audience, and began. Her opening words were clear and direct. She acknowledged the occasion and expressed her gratitude for the opportunity to speak, doing so in a way that felt genuine rather than rehearsed. There was no visible sign of nerves in her delivery. Her voice was steady and warm, carrying across the room without effort. From the very first sentences, it was apparent that she had not simply memorized a script. She was speaking with an understanding of what she was saying, and that understanding came through in the way the words landed. The themes Charlotte addressed in her speech centered on empathy, unity, and the importance of human connection. She spoke about what it meant to pay attention to the people around you, to listen to those whose experiences differed from your own, and to recognize that small acts of consideration had the capacity to create meaningful change over time. These were not abstract political ideas. They were values she had grown up with, values she had seen her parents model in their public work and in their private lives, and values she had begun to develop her own relationship with through the charity visits and community engagements that had been part of her life for as long as she could remember. One of the most noted moments in the speech came when Charlotte referred to her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II. She did not dwell on the reference, but she used it with care, drawing on the lessons of resilience and dedication to others that the late Queen had embodied throughout her long reign. It was a connection that resonated strongly with the audience. The Queen had passed away less than a year before this event, and the loss was still present in the national consciousness. Charlotte's mention of her was not an attempt to trade on sentiment. It was a genuine acknowledgement of a formative influence, and the room responded to it accordingly. As the speech progressed, Charlotte's composure remained entirely consistent. She maintained eye contact with the audience in a way that communicated confidence without arrogance. Her gestures were natural and understated, adding emphasis where it was needed without becoming distracting. She moved through the different sections of her address with a rhythm that suggested she had not only prepared thoroughly, but had genuinely internalized the material. There was no moment where she appeared to lose her place or search for a word. The delivery was, by any reasonable measure, accomplished. Her closing remarks brought the speech to a point of quiet but unmistakable impact. She called on those listening to consider the ways in which they might contribute to the communities around them, framing the idea not as an obligation, but as an opportunity. Her final words were delivered with a warmth that brought a particular kind of stillness to the room, and when she stepped back from the podium, the pause that followed lasted only a second or two before the applause began. The response was immediate and emphatic. People rose from their seats throughout the room, and the standing ovation that followed was sustained and genuine. It was not the polite applause of an audience going through the motions for the sake of a child who had made an effort. It was the response of people who had been genuinely moved by what they had just heard. Charlotte stood and accepted it with the same composure she had brought to the podium, neither overwhelmed nor unmoved, simply present in the moment in the way that had defined her throughout. William and Catherine, watching from the audience, were visibly emotional. The pride on their faces was not the performed pride of a public appearance. It was the straightforward reaction of two parents who had just watched their daughter do something genuinely remarkable. As Charlotte returned to her seat, the energy in the room remained elevated, and it would stay that way long after the event had ended. What had just happened was not simply a child doing well in a difficult situation. It was a demonstration of something that had been quietly developing for years, finally made visible to the world. The hours that followed Charlotte's speech felt different from the usual rhythm of royal coverage. Normally, when a member of the royal family appears at a public event, the media cycle moves through its familiar stages fairly quickly. There is the initial coverage, the photographs, the commentary, and then attention shifts elsewhere within a day or two. What happened after Charlotte stepped away from that podium did not follow that pattern. The conversation did not wind down. If anything, it gathered momentum as the day went on, spreading outward from the venue in London to newsrooms and social media platforms across the country and well beyond it. By the following morning, it was clear that something genuinely out of the ordinary had taken place. Broadcasters replayed footage of the speech repeatedly throughout the evening and into the following days. Newspaper front pages gave it prominent coverage, with writers and commentators focusing not just on the fact that a child of her age had spoken so capably, but on the substance of what she had actually said. There was a general recognition that her message had not been hollow or performative. She had spoken about empathy and community in terms that felt grounded and sincere, and that sincerity was what people kept returning to in their analysis. The standing ovation had not been a courtesy. It had been a reaction to something real, and the more people reflected on it, the more significant it appeared. Columnists who covered the royal family regularly noted, that they could not recall a comparable moment involving someone so young in recent memory. On social media, the response was extensive and largely consistent in its tone. Clips of Charlotte at the podium were shared widely, accompanied by comments from people in the United Kingdom, the United States, and elsewhere who had been struck by her composure and the clarity of her message. Hashtags related to her speech trended for several days, drawing in people who had not initially been following the event but found themselves watching the footage and reacting to it strongly. For many younger viewers in particular, Charlotte represented something they had not previously associated with the royal family. She was their age, she was speaking about things that mattered in the real world, and she was doing it without the kind of distance or formality that sometimes made the monarchy feel remote from ordinary life. That combination was unusual, and people noticed it. Some of the most widely shared reactions came not from established commentators or journalists, but from ordinary members of the public who had simply watched the speech and felt compelled to say something about it. Within the royal family, the reaction was deeply positive. King Charles III, who had long placed personal emphasis on the importance of environmental responsibility and cultural connection, was said to have been genuinely moved by what Charlotte had achieved. Her focus on empathy and the value of human connection aligned naturally with causes he had championed throughout his public life, and those close to him indicated that he saw in her speech a reflection of the direction he hoped the monarchy would continue to move in. The event had demonstrated that the younger generation of the royal family was capable of engaging with the public in ways that felt contemporary and meaningful, without abandoning the values that gave the institution its foundation and its sense of purpose. For an institution that had faced considerable scrutiny and debate about its relevance in recent years, Charlotte's speech offered something genuinely encouraging. For William and Catherine, the days that followed were a careful balance of private reflection and continued public responsibility. They were conscious, as they had always been, of not allowing the attention surrounding Charlotte to become overwhelming or to distort the environment they had worked hard to create for their children. The evening after the speech, the family came together for a quiet dinner at home. By all accounts, it was a warm and celebratory occasion, filled with the kind of ordinary family conversation that grounded Charlotte's extraordinary day in something familiar and real. Her parents spoke with her about what the experience had felt like, listened to her reflections on the day, and made clear that their pride in her had nothing to do with the applause or the headlines. It was rooted in the effort she had made, the honesty she had brought to her words, and the way she had handled herself when it mattered most. George and Louis were there too, and the dynamic between the siblings that evening was, by all indications, entirely normal. Charlotte was teased gently, made to laugh, and reminded that whatever had happened in that room in London, she was still simply their sister. The effects of Charlotte's speech were not confined to the royal family or the media. Across the country, her words generated a response that extended into schools, community organisations, and workplaces. Teachers reported that the speech had prompted genuine conversations in classrooms about empathy, about what it means to take an active interest in the people around you, and about the difference that individual actions can make at a community level. Some schools organised assemblies focused on the themes Charlotte had raised, using her address as a starting point for broader discussions about kindness and civic responsibility. Educators noted that the fact the message had come from someone their students' age made it land differently than it might have coming from an adult. There was an immediate relatability to it that opened up conversations that might otherwise have been harder to start. Community groups in various parts of the country were similarly energized. Initiatives focused on local volunteering and mutual support saw increased interest in the weeks following the speech, with organisers noting that a number of people had cited Charlotte's words as part of their motivation for getting involved. The idea that a child of her age could speak so directly about the value of contributing to the lives of others, and do so without preaching or lecturing, seemed to have struck a chord with people who might otherwise have been largely indifferent to a royal public address. Her age was, paradoxically, part of what made the message land so effectively. There was no sense of obligation or expectation in the way she spoke. She was simply saying what she believed, clearly and without pretension, and people responded to that in a way that surprised even some of those who had been closely following her development over the years. For Charlotte herself, the period that followed her speech was one of continued learning and a quiet but noticeable deepening of the commitments she had spoken about publicly. She did not retreat from the causes she had addressed or treat the speech as a finished chapter to be closed and moved on from. Instead, she approached it as a beginning. She visited charities and community organizations with renewed curiosity, asking questions about how they operated, what challenges they faced on a daily basis, and what difference their work made in practice for the people they served. One particularly notable visit took her to a youth centre in Birmingham, where she spent time with a group of children her own age. The children were initially shy, understandably so given the circumstances, but Charlotte's manner quickly put them at ease. She listened carefully to what they had to say, shared her own thoughts without dominating the conversation, and left the visit having made a genuine impression on the young people she had met. Staff at the centre spoke warmly about her engagement, noting that she had asked thoughtful and specific questions that demonstrated she had been paying close attention throughout the entire visit. Later that same year, Charlotte accompanied her mother on a visit to a primary school in a rural area of the country. The visit had not been widely publicised in advance, and the students were not expecting it. Walking into the classroom, Charlotte was greeted by children who were visibly astonished to find a princess standing in front of them. Rather than allowing the moment to become awkward or overly formal, she handled it with the same natural ease that had characterised her public appearances for years. She spoke to the students about their lessons, asked them about the things they enjoyed, and shared a little about her own experience of school in a way that was warm and unguarded. The teachers present noted that by the end of the visit, the children had largely forgotten to be nervous, which was perhaps the best indication of how well Charlotte had managed the room. Those who accompanied her on engagements like these during this period consistently noted the same quality. Charlotte was present in a way that went beyond the requirements of the role. She was not checking boxes or moving through a schedule on autopilot. She was genuinely interested in the people she met and the situations she encountered, and that interest communicated itself clearly to everyone around her. It was the kind of quality that is difficult to teach and impossible to fake, and it was becoming one of the most recognizable aspects of her public character as she grew older and took on more visible responsibilities within the family's broader program of work. As the months passed, recognition of Charlotte's contributions began to emerge from outside the immediate circle of those who had witnessed her speech firsthand. Several organizations working in areas related to the themes she had addressed reached out through the appropriate channels to acknowledge the impact her words had made on their work and on the communities they served. Some extended invitations for her to become involved in a more formal capacity in the future. While Charlotte was still considered too young to take on the kind of official patronages that older members of the royal family hold, the fact that these conversations were beginning to take place said something significant about the impression she had already made on people who worked daily with the issues she cared about. It was a sign that the impact of her speech had not faded with the news cycle, but had continued to resonate in practical and meaningful ways. Comparisons to Queen Elizabeth II continued to surface regularly during this period, drawn by journalists and commentators who had observed Charlotte's conduct both during the speech and in the quieter months that followed. The parallels were not forced or sentimental. Both demonstrated a capacity for composed public presence at a remarkably young age. Both carried themselves with a consistency that gave people around them a sense of steadiness and reliability. And both conveyed through their actions rather than their words alone a genuine understanding that the responsibilities of their position were something to be honoured rather than merely managed. Charlotte would have been the first to acknowledge that she was nowhere near the stage of her life where such comparisons could be made in full. But the foundations were clearly visible to anyone paying close attention, and they had not appeared overnight. They had been built steadily, over years, through the kind of patient and deliberate upbringing that William and Catherine had committed to from the very beginning. What this chapter in Charlotte's story ultimately makes clear is that her speech in 2023 was not a peak. It was a turning point. It was the moment when qualities that had been developing quietly and consistently for years became visible to a much wider audience. And when the question of what she might be capable of in the future shifted from vague speculation to something more considered and more grounded in observable reality. She had proven in the most direct way possible that she was not simply growing into a role that had been laid out for her in advance. She was shaping it according to her own values, her own experiences, and her own understanding of what it meant to be genuinely useful in the world. Her story at this point remains very much unfinished. She is still young, and the path ahead contains responsibilities and challenges that cannot yet be fully anticipated or are prepared for. But what has already taken shape is substantial and worth recognizing for what it is. A child raised with real care and intention, given both the freedom to develop her own character and the guidance to direct it well, stood in front of a room full of people and said something worth hearing. The world had listened, and it had not forgotten. Whatever comes next for Princess Charlotte, that moment and everything that followed from it has already secured its place in the broader story of the modern monarchy, and in the quieter, more personal story of a young woman who is still only beginning to understand the full reach of her own voice.